Manx Radio's budget coverage, brought to you by Crowe Isle of Man.
Well, Fastamai, good evening and welcome to Manx Radio's budget special. It is brought to you by Crowe Isle of Man. This is really an audience with the Treasury Minister Dr. Allinson. We are live from Looky's Bar and Lounge at the Palace Hotel. And this week, Dr. Allinson presented the budget to Tynwald, where it was approved, though not without some dissenting voices, which we'll come to in a moment. This is really another opportunity for you to engage directly with the Minister, pose your questions about the public budget's implications for you and also for our island community. So if you do have any questions, we want to get through as many of them as we possibly can. You can text 166 177 or email studio@manxradio.com. And for those of you here in the audience joining us at Looky's, we're eager to hear from you as well. I have to say, everybody here is energised and ready to contribute. Good evening, everybody. Hello. Look at that already. Gosh, it's only just gone 5. I should say at this point, all Tynwald members were invited to join us as well. As far as I can see, we've got Julie Edge, MHK, and Andrew Smith, MHK, with us. Do appreciate it is 5 o'clock on a Friday, as I say. But Treasury Minister, thank you for being here. I just want to first rewind to this time last week. How did you expect the budget to be received? Did it go as you thought it would?
Well, thanks very much. And I'd just like to thank you and Manx Radio for inviting me to one of the nicest bars in Douglas on a Friday night. You said last week we had the interesting experience of debating part of the budget before the budget, because we had House of Keys sitting, and on the agenda there was very much triple lock and pension upgrades. And so we had a really interesting discussion about that. Obviously, we've had the budget this week. Did it go as I expected? Yes, it's always a balancing act with the budget to try to deal with the aspirations and the demands both of the public and members of Tynwald, to try to make sure that we have both a reaction to some of the short-term issues that we're facing, such as housing, healthcare, education, but also long-term issues such as climate change, balancing the budget, reducing the drawdown on reserves, and most importantly, from my point of view with this budget, trying to improve consumer confidence, business confidence to drive economic growth.
Now, it's interesting you talk about it being debated in the House of Keys before it actually got to Tynwald. I think we know difficult decisions have to be made. We're continually told about that. But then you had a decision that was made about the Manx pension guarantee, but then backtracked when it was clear there was opposition. You've clearly got a Treasury team who felt that that was the right thing for a sustainable future. Why go against that simply to keep favour with people?
It's not just to keep favour with people. It was built in as a part of the budget in terms of uprating those pensions from 2019 according to Isle of Man CPI rather than a UK triple lock, which was a political decision made back in 2010. We'd done some preparatory work last year explaining the reason for that, which is the long-term sustainability of the National Insurance Fund. We then came forward with proposals that were published back in January, but Tynwald members and the members of the House of Keys really felt that was too much too soon, that they wanted more time to discuss it, more time for the public to both be informed and debate the changes we were bringing forward, and so voted, overwhelmingly that it should not be part of the budget and we should have a separate debate on this issue. I think it would have been reckless of me then to try to push forward a budget with that in that would obviously not have gone through. The budget is incredibly important. It deals with public spending, it deals with taxation, what we take from people, what we give back to people, and it deals with benefits. And if the budget hadn't got through, that would have put us in a difficult position of then trying to figure out where we went from there.
You were almost Oscar-like in your opening remarks in the budget, thanking pretty much every Tynwald member. I think everybody, apart from the President, got a mention, I think. So a clear attempt to bring people with you, but the reality is a third of the Keys voted against it. That is the highest number, certainly in recent memory. What does that tell you?
So thanking all individual members. Often budget speeches are a bit bland. It's just reading out a lot of statistics. And I get people then, when you look around, people have gone to their phones and they're doing other things. It was trying to engage members and showing what we were doing to address some of their comments that have been made over the last 12 months, some of the issues in their constituency, and make it a little bit real and keep people on their toes as well, because they didn't know when their name was going to come up next. I mean, that worked. 8 people voted against the budget, and they voted against the budget for different reasons. Some people, and even those who voted for the budget, then still criticised the overall budget process. And we had a debate last year. We've got a Tynwald committee set up to look at how we run the budget, how we engage people in it beforehand, and how we could perhaps improve the entire process of presenting the budget. And part of it this year was to talk about priority-based budgeting, looking at how we can engage members, not just how much we spend, but where we spend it beforehand, which is the important thing. So other people voted against the budget because they didn't like parts of it, in particularly healthcare spending and what they saw as not enough, or they didn't like parts of it in terms of the reduction in the headline rate of income tax and thought it should be more. And then other people were still concerned about the reliance on the reserves going forward as part of the budget and objected to that. So there was a range of different reasons. I have to be realistic that it is difficult to bring forward a budget that suits everyone. The Speaker, June Watson, gave me the benefit of the doubt, as he did David Ashford, for our first budget, and then voted against them because of the budget process. And I think we need to do more about that, and more members of Tynwald are saying we need to move with the times and have a better way of doing it.
But I think some people would say actually there's not enough time now really for radical change. We did run a poll on Manx Radio over the past 24 hours. It's not an exact science, but it was a very simple question. Are you happy with this year's budget? We've had just over 300 votes and 87.6% said no. There were quite a few who also said they didn't really care about it. I just want a show of hands in here with the audience. Who was happy with this year's budget? Can you put your hands up for me? So we've got a smattering of hands going up there. So it's a fair proportion of the room.
I'd give it 20%.
We know what you like with figures.
Which is about the same as your poll.
Has anybody got any thoughts? If we can just come to the front here. Phil Gorn is on the microphone here. If you can just give us your name, please.
Roger Tomlinson. You've started, Beth, by talking about the budget process, to which Alex has responded. Are you going to take that any further in revising or revamping the way the budget is compiled and announced?
So the answer is yes, but it's not down to me. As I said, we've got a Tynwald committee set up to look at the budget process, because I think if you look around the world at all jurisdictions, they all do something completely different. In the UK, when the Chancellor stands up, sometimes not even her own MPs know what's in the budget. At least we give it out to all Tynwald members at least a couple of weeks beforehand and go through and do briefings with them about the Pink Book. And then if they've got any questions, they can come and ask either myself or Treasury officials. So there's a whole range of ways that we could engage Tynwald members more. But more important than that, how do we engage the public more? Because a lot of members, when we were going through the budget debate, said, OK, I know about it beforehand, but I would like to ask what the people who put me here think about it as well. The issue, I suppose one of the issues is how we structure that properly so it doesn't become a popularity contest for the Treasury Minister, how we also explain some of the complexities of the budget so it can be understood easily, and also how we can then go forward with some of the difficult decisions we have to make without politicians who were put there to make the difficult decisions in some way abdicating their responsibility and saying, well, my constituents don't like it and therefore I'm going to vote against it. So I think it's a balancing act. I'm really looking forward to the committee coming back with their report in October and seeing if we can get a consensus of how we think things could be made better. But I think it's going to be a rolling programme, because you should never just sit on your laurels. And I think there are different ways, particularly with new technology, social media, to engage more and more people in it.
Mr. Tom, are you happy with that response?
Yes, the problem with that last remark of yours is we've got an election in September 2026, so it would be presumptuous of you to assume that you're going to take it forward into the next government.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And, although the election is 17 months away, electioneering has started already. I blame Andy Wint myself, because earlier on in the year he started counting it down. But it's true. I mean, in the last year of an administration, it gets incredibly difficult to do things, whatever they are, whether they're difficult or whether they're popular. But at least we can have that debate. We can look at doing some of that groundwork, and if we can build a consensus on a way forward, then I can look at structuring the budget for 2027 in a different way and see how we can engage people more and also get that understanding of some of the complexity of the budget and the pressures that are within it.
We've got another question.
Andrew Langer-Newton, Secretary, Isle of Man Green Party. Minister, the healthcare crisis is well publicised at the moment, which we've seen in recent months in Tynwald especially. Now, would you agree with me that just putting more money into the healthcare system is not going to deal with the crisis when we're facing obesity and overweight rates of 60%, increasing type 2 diabetes, but most concerning of all, in our primary school ages, increasing obesity rates. Now, this is a long-term strategic issue for the island that's only going to get increase the cost to the healthcare system. Would you agree with me that we should be looking wider, more holistically, funding education system, funding what we're giving our children in schools in terms of proper nutrition, and more investment into public health to deal with the causes of the crisis, not just the medicalisation of the issue that's funding now?
Minister?
Yeah, thanks very much. I've really tried not to use the word crisis because I think we do live in a world of perma-crises. And when we started off with there were energy crises and housing crises and healthcare crises. I think you're absolutely right that there is a significant long-term problem on the Isle of Man, but across particularly the British Isles in terms of obesity. Now, this has been brewing for many years, and the causes of it are multifactorial. Often they're socio-economic, but also the way that some of the food industry market very healthy products. And I think you're absolutely right to say that we have to start really early with children, but also involve their parents. There is no point getting a primary school kid and teaching them the virtues of eating a salad if when they go home they're not having the same access to that for lots of different reasons. It may be issues in terms of nutritional advice, but it may be issues in terms of poor living standards and poverty. So I think you are right to pick up on some of the major issues we have, and also, as you say, the medicalisation of it. For an English, I'll try not to talk too much about the politicians across the water, but to try to present the cure for obesity as having a monthly injection is absurd. We need to start at the root of it, and basically the root of obesity is far too much calories going in. It's all about diet. Yes, there is something about sport and activity and things like that, but overwhelmingly this is about what we eat rather than necessarily what we expend. So public health have done quite a bit of work. They will continue to do that work, but I think you're right that there has been an increased emphasis not only in terms of what food we feed our children in schools, but also the lessons they learn in schools to then hopefully take back to their parents and trying to involve the parents in that as well at the same time.
But I think what we want to know is where is the priority for that within the budget?
Within the budget, we are putting more money into education, but we're also trying to, now that we've got a permanent Director of Public Health, trying to work with them, because in the last administration, Public Health moved into the Cabinet Office, so trying to put some of these important policies, whether they be tooth decay in young children as well, which is similarly often about diet, whether that be obesity as well, at the forefront of some of the policies we bring forward. We've got the soft drinks levy, that is funding some of these as well, and certainly in terms of the dental campaign, that's been restarted. But I think you're right that we need to look at some of the nutritional aspects of the food we're giving kids, and also where it comes from in terms of provenance and in terms of supporting the local agricultural sector.
And we're here live this evening at Looky's Bar and Lounge, and there's something just going in the background. It's all happening here. I asked the audience before to put their hands up if they were happy with this year's budget. Can I just ask for a show of hands for people who weren't happy with it? Just a couple, actually. Phil, I don't know whether we can go to some of those people and get some comments.
Debbie Halsell from the Unite the Union.
Hi, I'm just ringing as regard. I just want to question more about the middle earner. Seems to be safety nets is put round the bottom earner. The top can afford basically what's happening, but the middle earner is being squeezed once again. And I just ask you, Minister, what exactly are you proud what you've delivered in this budget?
Minister. So this idea of the middle earner is an interesting one. What is the definition from Treasury's point of view of this middle earner?
Lots of people talked about the squeeze middle. We're dealing with people, either individuals or families, who are living off median earnings. And we're particularly looking at those people in the 25, 40, 45, 50 income bracket. What we've done in this budget is to reduce the top rate of income tax. We've increased the personal allowance for them, which is £250 for a single person, £500 for a jointly assessed couple. We've increased the NI threshold for those people who are on median earnings as well, and we've put significant amounts of money in terms of £3 million ring fence for the childcare strategy, also extra money going into child benefit, and for the first time in over a decade, we've changed the thresholds for child benefit to make sure that people earning up to £60,000 get the full child benefit, and that builds on last year where we made child benefit for second and subsequent children the same. So we are trying. Now, perhaps your next question will be, is it enough to reverse the increased inflation that they faced over the last 2 or 3 years and the increased cost of living? The answer is no, I'll be honest with you. It really isn't. When we've done analysis of the squeeze middle, those middle income earners, the biggest stress for them are housing costs, whether that's rental or whether that's the price of mortgages and the price of housing. That's what's making it difficult for people to stay on the island. That's what's making it difficult for people to relocate on the island, particularly if they want to start family. So we will need to do some serious work in terms of increasing the housing provision on the island and making it more affordable for people, either to buy or rent. But that will take some time, and we need to deal with some of those fundamental stresses between supply and demand, but also how we can ensure that more people get access to affordable mortgages as well.
That's all well and good saying about the people who have childcare issues, blah, blah. What about the likes of me? I'm a middle earner and I've raised my children. So what exactly is a benefit for me? So one of the things that you need to be looking at is when the UK do their budget, they may uplift their tax allowance, and I'm asking you, what would make people stay on the Isle of Man when they can go over there, secure property for 80,000 plus, they can basically have a better work-life balance? That what is attractive to the Isle of Man? Because at this moment in time, what is it you're attracting? You're attracting people of middle age coming over, which will basically contribute small, not significant amounts of money, that we will be looking at moving away from here, and then you're going to have your issues because your key workers will be looking, and one of the biggest things they do is when they relocate, they look at 3 things. It is basically healthcare provision, education and infrastructure, and unfortunately the island hasn't got that at that moment. So therefore you're missing out on a trick. And as I said, I've domiciled here 42 years and I've contributed for 42 years, and literally I feel that sometimes there's no longer a place for the middle earner to be sitting here anymore.
Okay. When I gave my budget speech, I really emphasised that we need to overcome some of the negativity. We have some incredible people working in our education service and our health service who I think are doing the best they can to provide as good a service as they can. So I disagree with you in terms of education and health on the Isle of Man. In terms of housing, I've already talked about the stresses there. And I would also disagree with you about getting a house for £80,000. There are certain pockets in England where you can still get that. But actually the housing prices and the same stresses that we're seeing here are being seen across. Why should you stay on the Isle of Man? What attracted me to the Isle of Man wasn't tax, wasn't the rate of national insurance. I never looked into those at all. It was being able to join the community on the Isle of Man. The safety, the security, the natural beauty we've got here, and the significant amounts of money we've put into the infrastructure on the Isle of Man, into our hospitals, into our schools, which I personally think provide a very good service. Yes, it could be better. Yes, we could get more money in there. But as we've already heard from one of the other members of the audience, we can't keep on writing blank cheques for healthcare service. We need some fundamental reforms for that. We have already seen some fundamental things being changed in education in terms of the quality assurance framework and how we go forward with education. And I think these will bear fruit, and I think they will provide for better services within what will be a relatively tight budget to reduce the burden on middle earners like yourself, so that you have more money in your pocket to enjoy living on the island.
Okay. Have we got some more questions from the audience? Christian.
Hello, my name is Andrea Krüger. I have a small business on the island, and I just feel that there isn't enough for small business. I really could have done with a VAT threshold increase. My business is it's in the service industry, high cost, low profit, and really I need to sell the units in order to, to make it through the year. And with the VAT threshold still being 90,000, I will probably have to take a long winter break to avoid falling into the VAT bracket.
Okay, so thank you very much, Andrea, for giving that particular perspective. So just for people who don't quite understand, so there's a VAT threshold of £90,000. If you earn over there, you suddenly have to pay VAT, but it's on the full amount as far as it's not just the amount that you earn over that. And that is different to the UK. One of the issues I had with this budget was we started work July, September, got it finalised in October, November, and then had to sell it through council ministers. And at the time, we were dealing with the VAT recalculation with the UK government and weren't quite sure which way that was going to go. That happens every 5 years where we look at the shared pot. And so my ability to look at some of the VAT thresholds, particularly since they were changing in the UK, and also looking at the overall revenue of VAT, which now is the sort of dominant amount of income that the government get at around about £388 million, was constrained. Now that we've got the first agreement completed and agreed, we do have a chance to look again at things like the thresholds and try to help some of the small businesses on the island. The other thing with small businesses is obviously the work that Treasury do with the Department for Enterprise and their local economy schemes. And I think they're coming online in April. I'd really, ask you to liaise with DFE, see if any of those schemes are applicable to you in terms of reducing energy costs by making things more efficient in terms of some of the promotions, digitalisation, other ways of reaching customers, because we really want to help some of the small businesses such as yourself, who are, when you look at the Isle of Man economy, are the bedrock of that. Most of our businesses are small. Yes, we've got some big multinationals and big companies here, particularly in the financial services sector, and thank you very much for your sponsorship, by the way. But we also have lots of small companies which I think have been faced with reduced consumer confidence, increased costs, increased wage costs as well, all at the same time, and that's put real strain on you.
I'm sure Andrew's very pleased to hear that there's going to be a chance to look at those thresholds. I guess the key question is when? Yeah,
I mean the budget cycle starts now. As soon as this budget is agreed, we will start again looking at how we can incentivise business confidence, consumer confidence, and economic growth. And some of that is around looking at the taxes we charge, looking at thresholds, whether that be national insurance thresholds for employers, employees, the rates, but also looking at VAT and seeing what the VAT receipts are looking like, where the pinch points are in the market, and how we can make it easier for small businesses to carry on.
Phil, we've got another question.
Hi, Devon Watson. I chair social housing for Douglas City Council, and every week we have to make impossible decisions when we allocate homes. Recently we had to make a choice between someone who is fleeing domestic violence, do they get a home, or does it go to someone who's homeless? And for this reason, I'm absolutely thrilled to see the creation of a housing deficiency fund. It can always be more, we can always do more to fight the housing crisis, but you can definitely see that there's a very firm impression here that the government is doing something to support local authorities in this regard. And for that, I do have to say thank you, because the 250 people sitting on our waiting list specifically aren't just numbers. Each one of them has a story and a reason why they desperately need that housing. So I do need to give that thanks there. But my main question relates to the fact that the thing that undergirds all of these budget discussions is that there is a spectre that does haunt the budget, and that is the fact that we have been a low-wage economy since 2008. Real wages haven't risen whatsoever. And a big part of that means as though that when people have low wages as a way of subsidizing some large businesses, some small businesses, it means as though there's less VAT income, there's less imports, there's less customs and excise duty, and as such we don't have the resources we need to fund social services, and we don't have the resources that create consumer demand to actually prop up and help small businesses, and they do need the help. So how do we meet those budget commitments when a lot of Tynwald seems to be opposed to aligning the minimum wage with the living wage?
Okay. Thanks very much, Devon, and thank you for the work you do in terms of Douglas City Council. The provision of social housing is really important. we haven't built enough, and I think that came out quite clearly when we debated the objective housing need assessment. We need more social housing, and we need decent quality and standard of social housing. So I know Douglas has been particularly concerned about trying to bring voids back into use really, really quickly, and also trying to build new housing stock as well for that need, for those over 200 people. Social housing is really important. The work the DOI are doing is really important, but also there is, again, we've talked about those people who are earning enough so that they're not within the current parameters of having eligibility to social housing, sometimes not even the first-time buyer scheme, but still really struggle to get housing, particularly in the private rental sector. So I think there's a huge amount of work that needs to be done there. I think you are right to a degree in terms of a low-wage economy, and also perhaps also I could add to that low-skilled economy. When you look at the demographics of the Isle of Man, it's predominantly low to medium pay. People talk about, we should tax the wealthy. Well, we can, but there aren't that many of them. The majority of people on the Isle of Man are the squeezed middle. They're people who have been affected by some of the changes we've seen since 2008 in terms of rising cost of living, rising cost of housing, and their wages haven't increased. I think in terms of the economic strategy, there was a clear commitment there to increase the median wage, and also a clear Tynwald commitment made in 2021 to merge the living wage with the minimum wage. And obviously we've had lots of discussions with that, and personally I've had lots of discussions with the Minimum Wage Committee in terms of how we can go forward with that. That commitment stands, that commitment is absolute, and we debated that in Tynwald this week. There has been a slight slowdown because the Island Plan said it was going to be happening in April this year. It's now been postponed. We're going to increase the minimum wage up to £12.55, but that eventual merge with what the living wage will be and should be, I think will take a little bit longer this year, but I'm absolutely confident we can get there, but get there in a staged way that doesn't put increased burden on small businesses and middle businesses and keeps those jobs there, but improves the quality of life for those workers.
This brings us to a quick question that we've had in to studio@manxradio.com from Robert, who says that there was discussion about minimum wage for low-paid workers on Manor Line today. Does Dr Allinson approve the increase to lift the Manx people out of poverty, and if not, why?
Absolutely. So again, we've seen significant increases in the minimum wage and significantly less people on it. The last time it was calculated, it was a couple of percent. What we've also seen is the absolute understanding that the minimum wage in some ways is irrelevant. It's an arbitrary figure. What we need to do is look at the living wage, how much it costs to have a decent standard of living and lifestyle on the Isle of Man, not something that's set by some committee behind closed doors, which is then agreed in Parliament. So that's why the Poverty Committee in 2021 started off with the living wage calculations. That's why they have been continued. That's why we've seen more and more people caught in the middle between the minimum wage and the living wage. Minimum wage is it's going to be £12.55. The living wage is currently £13.05, and that was last year's calculation, not this year's. So there is that gap. It's absolutely right that people deserve to be able, after working, to be able to enjoy living on the Isle of Man, which comes back to the conversations we were having about the squeezed middle. But we need to do that in a controlled way that manages to also satisfy the needs of those small and medium businesses that employ so many people, particularly in terms of hospitality and retail. So it is a balancing act. I think there's a clear commitment to get there by everyone in Tynwald, but it's actually that when we've got the roadmap, it's just the speed at which we get there has been slowed down by some of the decisions made this year.
Thank you so much for joining us. We are live from Looky's Bar and Lounge, and we're taking questions from the audience. Phil.
It's Margaret Brown. We've touched on health already, but it is the most important thing, I think, to all of us. The budget has been allocated. I'd be interested to hear how Treasury are going to monitor that now throughout the year. It's obviously has gone out of control. Various reasons have been talked about. From a personal point of view, I can remember the day when there was a hospital manager. We now have a corridor of managers. We also have, obviously, DHSC managers and administration. We have Manx Care managers and administration. I wonder how that is going to be reduced, because people say many times turkeys aren't going to vote for Christmas. And I do see that as one of the issues, and as somebody who's retired and paid into the NI fund for over 50 years, I do find it really concerning now that it seems to be privatisation in terms of the Chief Minister has said it's going to be free at the point of contact, but there is so much waiting time in so many areas that people, the only reason that they're going to be treated when they should be treated is to pay for it privately, and that is really concerning. So I would just like to hear how it's going to be monitored, and the balance too between things like health and the green agenda, which we've got 0.001% here who, we have to be proactive in going forward with properties to make sure they're well insulated, but to spend so many million on the green agenda too. I know somebody behind me is very keen green, so I don't want to be prodded. But there's a few things there, but perhaps the Treasury Minister could reassure on the monitoring, on the management, and really, is it going to be free at the point of contact? Somebody I spoke to today spent £80 going to get his ears syringed because he couldn't get it done as GP surgery. Somebody else with podiatry. Somebody, a child who was due to go away with a brain tumour just to be seen at Alder Hay. That's been put off. That sort of thing is really worrying.
Minister, I should say at this point we did invite the CEO of Manx Care to be with us tonight, but she wasn't able to be here. Would you be able to address those points?
Yeah, we could have a whole programme just on that one question. Thank you so much for it. So, first of all, healthcare costs are out of control. Well, one of my frustrations as Treasury Minister is I've spent the last 6 months trying to grapple with just one department. When you look at the money we're spending on health and social care this year in the budget, it's 387 million. It outstrips even complete benefit social security, which is always the highest figure. It's now surpassed that. That's 366 million. We've seen since 2019 over 100 million pounds just in supplementary votes coming into healthcare, and we've seen the budget for healthcare increase. From back in 2021 when Manx Care was set up, it was 270 million. It's now 357 million this year. And I think what they've done is put a huge amount of money into services, into safe staffing, but actually people like yourself don't see the benefits of that extra spending. And that's where we need to have that reform, so that people like you and others who don't necessarily go into Nobles, but want to be seen by GP, a dentist, issues like that, get that access and can see where that money's going to. So I think in some ways you're right, and the person behind you, said as well. You cannot just constantly throw money at a problem, hoping it will go away. There needs to be some structural reform. To put it in perspective, though, we put £20 million into the fund in terms of climate change, as opposed to £357 million going in every year at the moment, and more than that in terms of health. And we're putting in an extra £14 million as a contingency fund. In terms of privatisation, I think we've been quite clear as Tynwalds that the NHS, the ethos of the NHS being free at the point of need is there. But we've seen changes over the years since the NHS was set up in 48 in terms of dentists dropping out of the NHS contracts. That was their decision. And so that being privatised to a degree. We've also seen the increased use of private medicine in terms of the NHS, both here and across, getting private companies in to clear waiting lists. And we saw that here with Synaptic. The ear syringing is a bit of a bugbear of mine, because I wondered where on earth that was coming from, and apparently it was the ENT department that came to the conclusion that syringing your ears wasn't healthy, could rupture your eardrum, so you needed the suction now, and therefore that was moved to the private sector, and I have my own difficulties with that. And you talked a bit about waiting times. I mean, in terms, your key question was about monitoring it. So what we've done this year, really since June, was bring in scrutiny panels. So every month, individual departments would be brought in to Treasury. We'd sit down with them and go through their budget and how they were spending that budget and whether they were sticking to that budget. And it has been successful in the middle of last year. We had about 5 departments forecasting an overspend, and we worked with them really closely. We looked at how they were doing that. We've got it down to one: health. And they're still overspending, and that overspend is consistent, and the Minister will be coming forward with a supplementary vote. I think, how will we hold Manx Care to account in terms of providing service but coming within budget? We've tried to resource the Department for Health to bring in extra people to look at the spending, look at where it goes, and to make sure, one, it provides good value for money for the taxpayer, but two, it provides those outcomes people need. In terms of the level of the management, in terms of Manx Care, a lot of the people that were in the department have now gone, because that's been stripped out really, in terms of the number of people involved there, and they've got some of them have gone over to Manx Care. When you look at the number of managers there, it has increased, but I would advocate that actually the doctors shouldn't be managing the hospital; it should be managers, and the doctors should be doctoring. And that was one of the issues beforehand, is that doctors were having to do their own budgets and a whole lot of administrative roles, and actually we want them to see as many patients as they safely can during the day and get on with the job that they can do. So I think inevitably there's been an increase in management. What we need to do is make sure, one, they deal with a budget that can be afforded by the country, but two, it provides the services. And so the Minister of Health and Social Care stood up in this year's budget and said that one of the priorities of this year would be trying to put more resources, rather than put it into when people get sick enough to need hospital, putting it into community care, putting it into preventative care, putting it into general practice, putting it into community dentistry, so people can be seen before they get sick and deal with that in a much better way. And I think going forward, that the idea of a primary care led NHS has been there for decades. Howard Quayle, when he was Health Minister, went all the way to New Zealand to find out about it, and we still haven't got it yet, and we need to, because that provides a better service and a more efficient service, because the biggest waste in the NHS is of patients' time, going backwards and forwards all the time without getting the treatment they need, and that's what we need to crack.
I wonder if we can just come very quickly to a question that was texted in, and this might be one of those perceptions that maybe you'll be able to put to rest. It's from texter ending 280, who says, I was told by a South African resident that he and a family of 4 came here instead of the UK because the UK wanted £1,000 per person for the NHS, but the Isle of Man asked for nothing. His words, not mine. Is that true?
Yes. So, again, we've had that discussion in Tynwald. Claire Christian, when she was a backbencher, talked about the immigration healthcare levy, which is charged by the UK, and it's gone up steadily. It's due to go up to £1,200 for each person coming in. Now, we haven't been levying that, partly because we wanted to get people over here. We wanted to attract younger people with their kids to come and settle on the Isle of Man. But it's been increasingly apparent that with increasing healthcare costs, we need to make sure that everyone pays their fair share. So one of the debates that we had in this Tynwald, one of the statements from David Ashford in terms of immigration and migration and incentives and disincentives was around bringing in that healthcare levy, and that's going to be brought in this year. One of the problems with the UK is that there's so many exemptions that actually a lot of people don't pay that levy, and we need to be absolutely certain that if that levy is going to be brought in, it doesn't disadvantage those businesses that want to recruit from overseas, and it goes absolutely into healthcare. So that is on the cards.
Because I think what does happen, we know people move over here for work perhaps, but then often their family members, older members, come with them, sometimes with complex health needs that need extensive care. As we know, that costs money and must contribute to people who have lived here and paid in all of their lives, not being able to access appointments and care without delays. Yeah,
and I know that certainly in terms of education, they've been seeing a similar stress in terms of families relocating to the Isle of Man. Perhaps English isn't their first language, so they need extra resources, extra help to go into the schools to satisfy that. I think this is the reality of a global world where people move around an awful lot. People from the Isle of Man work all over the world. People from all over the world want to come and work on the Isle of Man. And I think it's absolutely right that everyone pays their fair share, but I think it's also absolutely right that we allow controlled migration and immigration to our island. Well, one of the issues that we're talking about, healthcare costs, is obviously if you live in the Isle of Man, you can move over here. If you live in the UK, you can move over here straight away. When I was a doctor, one of my new patients came in and said, right, I'm new to the Isle of Man. I need a new hip. My cataract's done, and I've got a hernia. Can you sort it out for me, please? And they've been on the ground for about a week. So people can move over here from the UK without any issues at all in terms of accessing healthcare or education. we're concentrating on people who need visas, yes, but we also need to make sure that everyone coming to the Isle of Man contributes to our society as well.
We've got some other questions from the floor.
Fastamai, first of all, congratulations to Manx Radio and Crowe for putting on this event. It's not many places where you get the chance to meet the politicians and actually ask the questions. Now, any listeners won't be able to see, we've been given a very glossy and very nice summary of the budget. And I just really would like to ask Dr. Allinson if we can go to the back page and have a look at the 5-year forecasts. You've got income targets there, you've got withdrawals from reserves, and you've got reserves valuations. Can you talk us through these briefly to the lay people, the taxpayers and the squeeze middles that are here tonight? Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks very much. So this year we've tried to do a couple of things, one of which is producing the 4 pages of A4, the budget in brief. That's actually available on the Isle of Man government website. If you Google budget 2025, I think you've also got it on the Manx Radio website as well, and we've been trying to put it out on social media as well. So, and what it's trying to do is present what is an incredibly complicated, almost £1.4 billion programme in perspective, but also successive Treasury Ministers have been saying, right, this is this year, what are our plans for the medium-term financial plan, i.e. the next 5 years? So what this graph shows is that we've got income targets, so this year it's 1.39 billion, that grows to 1.45 billion, 1.5 billion, 1.54 billion, and 1.58 billion by 29-30. That isn't increased taxes, that's economic growth, and that's economic growth based on things like wages going up, things like more wealth in society, but not based on increased population. It's purely based on some of those estimations about people's spending and people's income. Underneath that, we've got the withdrawals from reserves, which I apologise for. Ideally, we would spend exactly what we get in and have a bit of a surplus to put away for a rainy day, but we've had several years of rainy days. And at the same time, we've had increased expenditure in terms of public services, increased expenditure in terms of infrastructure. And obviously, we've gone through a severe period of high inflation and also everything that COVID brought us during the pandemic. So this year, we're forecasting £110 million coming from reserves to balance those books in terms of structural deficit that will then reduce to 82 million, 61 million, 56 million, then to 49.7 million. Now, that's the overall estimate, that financial envelope. Last year, we forecast that we'd be taking about 150 million from reserves. We actually came in just over 90. So I expect it to be less, but we are still drawing down from reserves. But then when you look at the reserve valuations, those have gone up. They're currently 1.86 billion, and they're forecast to grow up to £2 billion by 2029-2030. Now, that's based on the actual value of it. That's not index linked. So you could say, well, what's 20 billion in today's money, and what will 20 billion be in the money of 2029-30 once you've counted for things like inflation? What we're showing in absolute terms is that we're able to draw down from reserves to increase government income, but still maintain our reserves, particularly the National Insurance Fund. How are we doing that? By counting on economic growth, but also by counting on the investment strategy we have for our reserves. That's the Isle of Man, the people's reserves. They're invested to try to get the best interest rate going forward. But again, it is trying to balance that budget and deal with some of the stresses we've talked about in terms of healthcare and education, to deal with some of the issues we've talked about in terms of maintaining a support for the local economy and social housing and housing provision, but at the same time leave that nest egg there, leave that comfort blanket for reserves that we have always had and we always need to maintain.
Phil.
Hi, it's Karen. I'm just wondering, who is held accountable for not managing departmental budgets?
Thank you. That's a very good question. So each department has their own financial officer, and they are responsible. In terms of the Treasury Department, we have a Chief Financial Officer who is responsible, and ultimately it will come down to me also as Treasury Minister. But each individual department has a financial officer who's responsible for, maintaining the budget. And so that they report, as I said, now we get them in on a monthly basis, looking at the budget, holding them to account, seeing where the stresses are, where the strains are, and making sure that they can prioritise the budget. We also now publish on a quarterly basis the management accounts in real time, because beforehand the public only found out about an overspend at the end of the year when somebody stood up at Tynwald and said, "Oh, sorry, can I have another 10 million, please?" That's wrong. People should know what's going on during the year, and that's why this year we've been publishing those. Now, in this budget, I've been criticised that there's not enough money in it for the public sector, because what we've done is quite clearly states that nobody is having their budget cut, but their budget's going up by 2% to cover pay and 1% to cover non-pay inflation. Now, we know that inflation's running at 2.5% at the moment. We know that some of the pay demands are coming in at 3, 4, 5% or more, depending on the various professions. So really, those departments are being told, you have got to come in within your means. This is your budget for the year. If pay or inflation are above that budget, you're going to need to what you stop doing, what you prioritise as your key services, and come in on budget. Now, that's going to make some difficult decisions, and I will be and have already been accused of instituting cuts. But the government have to live within its means, in the same way as everyone else is trying to do on the island. And when we did all the road shows last year following the budget, that was the biggest impression we got. That, if you're asking people to save money, if you're asking people to make efficiencies and productivities, that has to start at home, that has to start with government, which is why we're now looking at headcount, looking at efficiency programmes, productivity programmes, and we will have to stand up at the end of the year and say where we've got to.
What will happen if they don't come in on budget?
So, at the moment, as I said, it's Manx Care who are looking as though they won't come in on budget. They've been quite clear about that from the word go. Again, they publish their management accounts, the board do. Their minister will have to come forward to Tynwald and explain this and go for a supplementary vote, probably in March.
Okay, we're going to take another question now.
Thank you. It's Juliet from HK actually, but just to the Treasury Minister, asked a written question with regards to his scrutiny panels, and the outcome of that was out yesterday. And obviously there's a RAG rating of red, amber or green, and additional meetings would be held if they were red, I would expect. Why did Health not have any additional meetings between September and January, and no meetings after January?
Okay. So thank you very much, Julia. Thank you for your question, which, as you say, was published. Those are standard scrutiny panel meetings that happen with all departments. We've been holding extra meetings outside of that with the Department of Health and Social Care, really drilling down, and they've been having extra meetings with Manx Care. And we've been also having supplementary meetings with the Manx Care Board, both at a Treasury level, but also at a Council of Ministers level. So those are the standard, the scrutiny panel meetings that we brought in. The situation with Manx Care is exceptional, and so we've been using extra measures on top and beyond that. And that included putting some extra resources into health and social care, really to look at the operating model of Manx Care and see how it could be justified and actually improved. And that's going to be a bit of an ongoing work. Manx Care have inherited a department that consistently was overspending. Now, various members of Tynwald have said, well, the budget's not enough, you should give them more money. I think now is the time to actually say, enough is enough. We've given as much as the country can afford in terms of healthcare. There is going to be a consultation for healthcare levy for extra resources, but we really need to look at those fundamental reforms we need in the way health and social care is provided to make sure people see the benefit of all the extra money that's going in there. Because at the moment, I think people, a lot of people get incredibly good service from Manx Care and from social care, but there are some who don't, and we need to make sure that people get the right outcomes, because that's the thing that really matters in terms of healthcare.
We've just had a comment emailed in by Anne who says, how come all we seem to hear is what we need to do as opposed to what has been done? Talk is cheap, actions are what count. And I wonder, Minister, if people are just a little bit fed up of hearing about committees and reports into things which cost money themselves and take up time.
Yeah, and I can appreciate that. Again, this is all about delivery. This is all about not just talking about it and setting up committees and strategies. It's actually doing things. So as I've said, what we've been doing in terms of Treasury and all the departments is holding them to account during the year. And by the end of March, there should be one department that's overspent. The others have been bringing everything back into line. They're getting their budgets back into balance and coming back realistically. And we will work with them for the next year to make sure that happens. But at the same time, often people expect government to do more. And so there's that balance between, do we have a smaller, smarter government, or do we constantly try to expand what we do and do more and more? And that's the balance, because at the end of the day, it comes down to what we can afford. And I think we do need to be realistic with the Manx people to say there's a whole range of things we can do and a whole range of priorities. You know, if I went around today, probably almost everyone in the room would have something that we really think needs extra funding, whether it be climate change, whether it be housing, whether it be healthcare, whether it be education. Yes, but we can't do all of that. We still, at the end of the day, have to look at what government take in, i.e. taking in from the taxpayer and corporate tax, and that's a whole other subject in terms of that, but also what we can afford and what we can afford that prioritises those services that really touch people's lives and improve them.
We've got a couple of minutes before the news at the top of the hour. Phil, we've got another question from the audience.
Yes, I'd like to give you some personal information. Since November, I was told I had an expanded, I can't think of the word, down where it, anyway, sorry, a prostate. I'm sorry, I'm ex-Royal Navy, and a bomb went off on the side of a ship, which I was supposed to look after, and it's made me unusual.
Don't worry about it at all. Carry on.
Since November, I've been told to see a specialist, then it's cancelled. All of these since November. I got one yesterday to say you'll be seeing, you'll be hearing from the specialist. It's been cancelled. Now the next one is March. I don't mind. I don't feel any symptoms. I'm getting on okay. I'm fit. It just seems there's more paperwork, more people telling you what to do. I can't even get a phone call. How come the specialist, if it is a specialist, can just get on the phone and say, that's okay, Mr. Mills, no problems at all, that's good. They can't even phone up. This is going back to November, and the next phone call, which I'm due, is supposed to be in March. I can understand that there's a budget. I just don't understand why there's so many people telling us what's going to happen when nothing does happen. And one more, well, there's a few more things, but I don't want to waste everybody's time.
Don't worry at all. We can come back to you, because this is going to have to be very brief before the top of the hour, but clearly a distressing situation.
Yeah, so sorry about that. So you've got an enlarged prostate, but it's asymptomatic, so you're probably, routine appointment. And I'm sorry that they've been cancelled. There were a whole range of reasons for that. We had nurses' strikes, we had threatened doctor strikes. There are all sorts of things going on. What I would say is one of the things that I applaud Manx Care for is setting up MCALs, the Manx Care Advice and Liaison Service. If you're having problems with the appointment, if you're not sure where you are, phone them up. They will get back to you straight away and sort out that appointment. And again, if you're not sure where you are in a treatment programme, phone them up. They will find out, and they've been providing an excellent service.
We're here at Looky's Bar and Lounge. The audience hasn't left after the news, so I take that as a good sign. Everybody okay? Yes. A little bit more animated now, which is great. We're taking questions from the audience, and I think we can speak to Crowe Isle of Man now.
Thank you, Minister. Adam Clucas, Senior Tax Manager at Crowe Isle of Man, and thank you again for coming here and taking our questions. One of the biggest concerns of Isle of Man PLC is recruitment. One of the smaller changes in the budget was that the National Insurance Holiday Scheme is going to be focused to just returning students from 6th April 25. Now, given that they're one of the natural cohorts that are likely to come back and get those younger active workers that we're looking at, the holiday itself is, it's a nice, it's a few £100 probably on a graduate salary. When is there a chance to go further with this and look at, maybe cancelling student debt for students that come back, maybe hit certain requirements? if they come back and really look at maybe getting a better return on capital from the students that we're sending across?
Minister.
Yeah. Well, thanks very much, Adam. Thanks very much again for sponsoring this programme through Crowe. So you're absolutely right. We'd had an NI holiday scheme, which most people wouldn't know about because it's for new residents or returning Manx students, and basically it meant that if they took up full-time jobs and did 12 months, they could reclaim some of their NI up to about £4,000, depending on what sort of salary they were on. We've done quite a lot of analysis of that, saying, did that incentivise new people coming to the island? And we couldn't really get the answer for that, because whilst we spent quite a lot of money on it, and since the scheme started, around about 6.8 million, which is going to be published as again a Tynwald's answer. We couldn't really say whether those people would have come here anyway. And there's a whole range of other recruitment and incentives for people to come to the Isle of Man on top of this. And certainly, I think Tynwald members have consistently questioned using the NI fund for this sort of means. So that's stopping for new residents now. But we have continued it for returning Manx students because we wanted to build on this in terms of other incentives. Similarly, we're in the situation now with the student awards, whereby if you go to the UK, the government will pay the vast majority of your tuition fees, and yet if you want to stay on the island and do a distance learning course, that's not paid for. And so I've been talking to the Education Minister in terms of looking at those student awards so that more people can study on the island, and certainly putting more money into University College Isle of Man, which provides degrees through the University of Chester, rather than go across. Because from my own experience of my kids, their experience of university is very different to mine. The contact time they get is much less. The cost of going to university now is far more in terms of living costs as well. And when they get a degree, that used to be almost like a guarantee about work. But actually, because there's so many graduates now, the graduate employment is come to a bit of a crunch point. So I think we absolutely need to keep more people on the island to be able to learn here and study here. But we need to attract those students who've gone across back. And there's a whole range of ways we can do that. So I will be working with DfE to look at things like the graduate schemes that currently give extra resources to employers, but what else we can do to advertise the island to students to get them back. And also to keep them here in the first place in terms of some of the training that goes on. Because some of my son's friends, when they left school, they didn't go to university, they went straight into the financial sector. And I got all their training there and grew a career by being on island through what's basically vocational training, rather than going for academic training and then coming back and starting all over again.
Can I just ask very quickly, when it comes to the Manx students that this is applicable to, how long ago can they have studied, or is it just at a certain time frame?
The scheme came in 2019. Any student returning within 5 years of finishing their degree can apply for this. So they need to come back to the island. They need to have a permanent job. They can't just come back for a couple of months. Come back to the island, and once they've done the 12 months here, they can apply for a refund of the national insurance that they paid. And again, will that in itself make the decision easier for people? No, it's a relatively small amount of money, but at least we're doing something to help with the relocation expenses. We're doing something to say thank you for coming back. We're doing something to try to give incentives, but we need to build on those. Now, your other question was writing off student debt. That's difficult to quantify because obviously we still pay the vast majority of tuition fees. We could do various bits and pieces in terms of tuition fee debt and look at that. But again, this is a range of incentives and disincentives that the government are looking at to look at not just returning Manx students but migration in general to get people back here.
Christian, we've got somebody else from the audience.
Hi, yeah, Dr. Allison, thanks very much. Steve Billinghurst, I'm chair of the Institute of Directors. I'd like to ask a question about I welcome, the open discussion we're going to have in the consultation on the Manx pension and the application of a triple lock. One of the other significant costs to government is the ongoing pension costs for public sector. When can we expect the government to also open a consultation on the ongoing cost for our future generations having to pick up the cost of significant pensions for public sector workers?
Okay, thanks very much, Steve. So we had that conversation back in 2016. We brought through legislation in terms of the cost-sharing agreement in 2020 that increased contributions from people by 2.5%, decreased what they got out from the pension when they retired by about 6%. That's rebalanced some of the actuarial projections and also rebalanced the pension deficit that was there. Again, previous administrations decided not to have the public sector fund, so it's now coming out of general revenue. And what the budget shows is that's going to cost about £40 million this year, but actually has been stabilised over the future years as well at around £40 million in terms of that deficit. We've got, back in 2022, the first actuarial review and revaluation of it. We're currently having talks with the Public Sector Pension Authority in terms of how we rebase the public sector pension going forward for the next 5 years. So there's been a lot of work in terms of, one, dealing with the ongoing liability, but two, dealing with the ongoing costs of public sector pensions. Again, in the same way as we're trying to guarantee pensions for other pensioners, we have to guarantee pensions for those people who've put sometimes decades into public service. The average retirement pension for a public sector worker is around about £10,000. Some get far more than that, particularly some of our medical staff who are on high wages, some of the top executives who are on high wages. But again, it's trying to balance that commitment to public sector pensions and paying them whilst also making it affordable in terms of the overall taxpayer. So a lot of work's already been done, but that's an ongoing programme to rebase this and make sure it's affordable in the long term.
Okay, Phil, we're going back to the audience.
Hi, and on a similar note, I'm Andy Saunders from the hospitality trade. The cost of government is really something that is affecting all of us, especially the squeeze middle. The amount of money that comes out of our pockets and goes directly to government is an issue. And I appreciate that you've taken, or Mr. Cannon's taken, an attempt to bring that figure down this year. But really, long term, how can we continue to reduce the cost of government and therefore allow our people to keep more money in their pockets of their own?
Yeah, thank you very much, Andy, and for your comments. Again, there's the cost of government and there's the size and scope of government. Now, when you look at the major expenditure that from government, as I said, the biggest big ticket item is health and social care, then social security. 80% of that of benefits go in terms of pensions. Then you've got education, sport and culture, and then various things like infrastructure, home affairs. Poor old environment, food and agriculture only gets 24.2 million, and they're the ones dealing with all the fallen trees this weekend. So I think when you look overall, you've got a wide range of things government do. In terms of balancing the cost of that, we could do less, but actually we could probably do the same amount, but in a much smarter way. So that's where the Chief Minister, in terms of his statement in terms of energy efficiency and productivity comes in, how we can do things smarter, how we can bring in digitalisation, and in the budget there's £5.3 million going into the Transformation Fund to digitalise some of the services and change the way that people interact with government, but do it in a more convenient way for those people, particularly online.
Can I just point out, though, that sometimes, and this is what we hear on Manx Radio sometimes, is that people feel that if it moves in that direction, then they're not able to move with it because not everybody is digitally savvy.
Yeah, and it is trying to balance that, and we've seen the same with the banking sector, getting rid of retail branches and moving everyone online. That's great, unless you don't have Wi-Fi, and then you feel disenfranchised. And there is those people who are marginalised due to being digitally disenfranchised. Sometimes that we can classify that as older people. I know some great people on the net who can do far better jobs than I can in terms of using social media. But we do have younger people, particularly people with mental health problems, learning disabilities, and older people who feel disenfranchised by that. And that's been borne out by my decision, Treasury's decision, to get rid of the MyCard system at the end of the year and moving on to bank accounts, and people saying, I don't want it in a bank account, I want to be able to get the cash from the post office. So it's trying to digitalise services, that productivity and efficiency, but make sure that we don't leave people behind and deal with those marginalised people as well.
Okay, we've got about a quarter of an hour left, so we want to get through as many of the audience questions as possible. Christian?
Dr. Allison, my name is Rumi Setna. I run a small business here. Have you considered the zero-rate corporation tax? The reason I'm asking you is that we have zero rate, which is welcoming new businesses, But when a resident of Isle of Man draws from that zero rate corporation tax, he pays 22%, and from next year 21%, and hopefully it goes down. Whereas foreign companies don't pay a penny. Now, I have mooted this idea to Editeur about 10 years ago, 11 years ago, that why don't we have a withholding tax of 5% on dividends that foreign companies draw from here. That will solve our problem. I reckon around 1.5 to 2 billion pound goes out of this country. If you took 5% from there, you'd get 75 million to 100 million pounds. That will help the small businesses, the middle-aged earners, the health service. The poor guy is waiting since November for a prostate examination. You'll be able to employ proper surgeons who will perform surgeries here. We won't have to go to Liverpool for treatment. Consider this, and you'll spend that money wisely.
Would you consider this, Minister?
We've actually, so thanks very much, Ruby, for your comments. Again, in terms of corporation tax, we've kept on the 0.10, except it was 0.15 last year, because what we've done is adopt what's called Pillar 2. So it's a worldwide minimum corporation tax of 15% on those multinational companies with a turnover of more than 750 million euros. That's been brought in from January. What this will mean is an extra tax revenue. We forecast for around about 35 million coming in 27, 28 and going forward. And of that extra revenue, we're putting £10 million back into an economic strategy fund to actually invest in the local economy. When we've looked at some of the taxation on dividends from owner-managed businesses, and the way that they're also charged national insurance, that is something that we're considering, but working very closely with those people who might be impacted by it, by going out to consultation again in terms of how that would work. And in terms of non-resident taxation, through our dual taxation agreements, we are trying to get as much of that coming back into the Isle of Man economy. So there is a lot of work being done in terms of corporation tax and also Pillar 2, but at the same time making sure that we are a competitive tax jurisdiction, particularly with things like the financial services sector, because we're competing with other jurisdictions, particularly Jersey and Guernsey, don't have VAT on their financial services. So it is trying to get that balance right.
I suppose sometimes that can lead to people on the island thinking, who's the priority?
For me, the priority are the people of the Isle of Man, but all the services that we provide are provided through the health and wealth in the economy. And again, one of the things I pointed out in the budget speech is government don't create economic growth. It's the companies based here that create economic growth. It's government's job to enable the right financial and other environments that are needed for those companies to survive, whether they're small, medium or large companies here that employ people who then pay the tax, who pay corporation tax, that fund all the services that people deserve and demand.
Another question now.
It's the stated policy of the Manx government to attract another 15,000 people to the island. I just wonder, since that policy was implemented about 2-3 years ago, how far have we gone down that line? In other words, how many people have been attracted to the island? And I would like an assurance that the work permit system is still as stringent as it ever was, and that it hasn't been relaxed. In other words, I'm a bit worried that certain types of people might be coming to the island to accept jobs which don't really exist. Now, secondly, if you are going to attract people to the island, and this goes back to what Debbie was saying earlier, you have to fix the infrastructure. I know two people who came to the island, husband and wife, to take good jobs in the private sector. They tried to get off the island 3 or 4 times to go back to see their family, and each time their flight was cancelled and they couldn't go. In the end, they decided they would have to go back to the UK. They couldn't stay in the island. So I just wonder what policies there are in the budget to try and attract those positions. And given also that it's difficult for the Isle of Man residents to get off the island and be certain that they can get off and be certain that they can come back. It means an extra 1 or 2 nights stay in the UK before you take your flight, and the same coming back. I think this really is essential to do something with the airport. Thank you.
Colin Brown, thank you very much indeed. If you can answer briefly, Minister.
Briefly, okay, so population growth. So we had a population report that was published last month by Statistics Isle of Man, which showed a mixed bag. Yes, the population was growing, but at a relatively slow rate because the birth rate's reduced. The death rate's still there, so we need regularly people coming over to increase the active working population. But it has been a lot slower than we expected and that we necessarily needed to give that footfall for local companies. In terms of work permits, yes, there was a big debate last year in terms of whether to relax them completely, and Tynwald absolutely agreed that they shouldn't be relaxed, so the work permit system is still here. It will provide a fast service for those people who deserve the work permits and say no to those people who don't. But you're quite right that there have been a number of concerns about immigration, i.e. people coming over on visas, not necessarily coming from the UK, and whether they are coming to real jobs or whether actually they're being exploited by organised crime to get them over here on false pretences. And so a huge amount of time and effort has gone in right across government to try to tackle that, because what we have become absolutely aware of is that we are not alone in the world by being targeted by organised crime, whether it's people smuggling, whether it's drug smuggling, or whether it's money laundering. And so we need to deal with that in the right way. In terms of connectivity, that was something, again, when we went on the road shows, that was really important for people. We live on a fantastic island, but every now and again it's nice to get off of it. And you need to rely on a ferry in the morning and the flights arriving in Ronaldsway. A huge amount of time and effort has been gone into rejuvenating Ronaldsway after what happened during COVID, when aviation completely went, when the aviation industry went into meltdown, and trying to get both the flights and the routes and the reliability right. And so the air traffic controllers worked really well. I'm sorry about the flights being cancelled this morning. That was the wind, and we've seen what happens when you try to land a plane in high winds in Toronto. So we have to be realistic that sometimes we won't get on and off. But that connectivity is an absolute key, and government, again, are putting huge amounts of money into making sure that the airport itself is fit for purpose. Did some capital schemes agreed in January, Tynwald, about drainage there, making sure that the aircraft were able to land, but also in terms of subventing some of the flights from airlines to come in here and dealing with big airlines like EasyJet to make sure we're still an attractive place to fly to.
That was briefish. Christian, another question from the audience.
Thank you, Minister. Keith Dalrymple, Northern Chamber of Commerce. Minister, prior to coming here this evening, and thank you, Manx Radio, for the invitation, thank you, Crowe Isle of Man, for facilitating this, but I made it my business to inquire amongst the Chamber members and with my other hat on from the construction industry, the reaction to the budget that you presented. Amazingly, there were very few specific criticisms, generalisations, and I have to say this evening's event has personified that it has been a very polite and measured presentation. You haven't been attacked this time, Treasury Minister. I'm pleased about that. You've mentioned consensus, and you attempted to build a consensus, I believe, in Tynwald, but 8 members of the House voted against your budget. I don't know whether I have missed something, but amongst those 8 members, there was a fair bit of repetition, looking for transparency, but only one specific item was mentioned by one: more money for health services. Now, as far as transparency is concerned, you have again today illustrated that there is a discussion about the manner in which the budget, the compilation of the budget. If there is to be a change in procedures, then the result will be that we'll still be looking for budget funding to be adhered to. And in what manner will that be achieved? How is that to be implemented?
Thank you very much indeed. Would you be able to answer that briefly?
Yeah, thank you very much, Keith, for getting sounding. Yeah, this budget has been easier than last year's. I've been accused for trying to buy votes and perhaps playing safe. At the end of the day, I don't try to controversy, but last year's budget, I think, was the right thing to do when we were dealing with significant overspends, and we needed to get those overspends back under control. We needed to raise more money, balance the books without drawing down too much on reserves. So I think you're absolutely right in terms of getting consensus both within Tynwald, who vote on it. Basically, they represent you, and if they don't like the budget, they're absolutely in their rights to vote against it. And various people did. We talked about the diverse reasons for that beforehand. I think there is that need for consensus. There is that need to look at the overall budget process, not just how it's presented at the end, but what goes into it at the beginning, where we put the taxpayers' money in at the first place, and trying to get those priorities set out really quite closely. Because although every department have to come forward with a department plan that's been debated, people have criticised that as well. So we've got to get a better way to point out to the people exactly where their taxpayers' money is going, what the priorities for government are, and do that right across the year, not just once a year in February when I stand up and give a budget speech.
Okay, hopefully time for a couple more quick questions.
Thanks, Beth. Thanks, Phil. Minister, hi. Damien Henderson, Principal of King William's College and the Buchan School. I understand that education isn't the focus for this budget, but it has been mentioned a couple of times this evening. So I'll ask the question anyway. And I'm really very excited about the prospect of a large amount of money being spent on Castle Rushen High School. And I just wondered, from a sort of technical point of view, if any of that's covered in this budget, or is it something we'll be expecting maybe this time next year?
Okay. So, Damien, thanks very much for coming along. Again, last year's budget was very much about education. We've got £8.3 million going back into education, 3 million of it ring-fenced for the childcare strategy. We are working with education in terms of some of the pressures and demands they've been under as well. They've managed to they forecast to come in on budget this year despite some increased demands in terms of the resources they need and increased wages that they're giving to their staff. In terms of Castle Rushen High School, to be honest with you, I'm embarrassed about the whole thing. It's been talked about for a decade. When I was in education, when I got in 2020, I made it one of my priorities, and then it seems to have fizzled out again. We are having regular meetings involving all the local politicians, trying to involve the local commissioners as well, and when we get the plans, the local people, to make this a reality, because it is an investment in our children who are the future of our nation. Simple as that. So it is a priority. The issue is it's a big capital programme. It's not in the Pink Book at the moment. What's in there is the project development funding, I think 3.2 million that's gone in to get all the plans up and ready, and my hope is that we can come forward to Tynwald for the full funding for the full programme as soon as possible, hopefully within this financial year.
Okay, time for one very quick last question.
Minister, the Chief Minister has already flirted with the idea that the Isle of Man government isn't going to hit its 2030 climate change targets. Does this budget take seriously the opportunity of clean energy in the Isle of Man and the risk of inaction?
Yeah. So when I stood up to do my budget speech, I talked about the reality of climate change becoming even more apparent this year than next. I think it is the budget does show increased investment right across the piece. And again, we talked beforehand about should it be money into climate change or should it be money into health? They're both intertwined. The effects, the health effects of climate change are immense, whether that's air pollution, whether it's increased temperatures. So it has to be there. And our energy efficiency scheme has touched, 10% of households now, and there's an extra £750,000 into that to really help people reduce their energy needs. But we've got some big decisions to make in terms of decarbonisation of the generation of electricity.
Sorry, can I just push you for a yes or no answer to that question?
Yes.
Okay. I think there's possibly more debate to be had for that one. But Minister, thank you very much indeed. I think we're going to wrap up that budget special here, but just time for a few well-deserved thank yous. And thank you very much to the Treasury Minister, Dr. Allinson, for joining us tonight. And I think it's fair to say, after an already long week, I think your willingness to face more questions is very much appreciated, certainly by the audience here. A huge thank you to Crowe Isle of Man for supporting our budget coverage. I think what we strive to do with the budget this time of year is to make what is, as you mentioned, Minister, very complex information accessible and, dare I say it, occasionally even enjoyable. No reaction there. Crowe support certainly makes that possible, so thank you. And also thank you very much to Looky's Bar and Lounge at the Palace Hotel for hosting us. The ambience here does add a really special touch, even if the temptation of the bar's offering was a little bit too much sometimes. And from Manx Radio's point of view, there's so much that goes into making outside broadcasts like this happen. So thank you very much to the engineers, to Ben and Alex, to Phil and Christian, who've been waving those microphones with a degree of professionalism you can only dream of, and also to Amy and Lauren here and Chris Quirk back at Broadcasting House. If you haven't seen enough, you will be able to watch this back as a video. So that's something for you to do, Minister, at the weekend. It'll also be available as a podcast as well. Thank you for tuning in. Have a great Friday evening.
Manx Radio's budget coverage, brought to you by Crowe Isle of Man.